All right, everybody, we're back with the next little tier list I'm making, or more accurately, just chance to talk about Heroes Golden Era, specifically the Necropolis faction. I don't really know where to start. I didn't really plan a good start for this one. I guess I can do a brief little overview here about how Necropolis tends to be one of the favored factions within the Heroes community. Partially, I think, because it's just fun to play Necromancy in general. But I think also because in many of the different Heroes of Might and Magic games as go on, Necropolis just seems to be really, really powerful because the ability to get infinite units, even if they're your tier 1, tends to be pretty powerful. I know certain Heroes games have done the best to their ability to fix or balance Necropolis, but in general, Necropolis tends to be a pretty powerful faction just because of how easy it is to keep large stacks of units alive for a long period of time. I will say, right off the bat, that Olden Era, in my opinion, does a better job than most of the games that have come before it. In fact, you know what? Scratch that. I will say that I think that Olden Era does the best job, even, of all the different Necropolises in the past as far as balancing the Necromancy skill. Now that Necromancy... let me rephrase that sentence here real quick. So, Olden Era, the new way in which... I'm screwing this up, but I'm gonna stick with that. So, Necromancy in Heroes of Might and Magic Olden Era, it now affects your entire army as opposed to just giving you skeletons based off of the enemy's HP. It now revives based on the enemy's HP versus all of your units' HP. Revives 5. It's not 5, 10, 15. No, it's I think it's like 6, 8, 10% by default, with the ability to get an additional 2% in the skill tree. Pretty sure. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Or what it is. Well, I'm going to say was, because it's a demo, so subject to change. Pretty sure that's what it was, at least back in the demo here. I would have to double check. Anyway, the point is that now you don't just get massive armies of skeletons, like in Heroes 2 and more importantly Heroes 3. You don't get to cheese large stacks of vampires and other just ludicrous units as you did in Heroes 5. Granted, there was the whole, like, what do they call it, Necropolis power or whatever. Whatever your little, like, energy bar was that you could use Necromancy for. But the point is, I think this is probably the best iteration of Necromancy we've ever seen so far. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is the best one. The result, though, is that all of the Necropolis units in general tend to be just a little bit on the weaker side comparative to their respective counterparts across the factions. But I think, again, with the way Necromancy works in this in this game, I think it's a fair trade-off. Is that your units are just a little bit weaker, but you tend to get a lot of them per week usually, and you get to keep them after a battle when you win, or you don't get to keep them, but I should say you get to revive a portion of them after the battle's over. So I think that's a fair trade-off. Is that your units tend to be just a little bit weaker, but they're still effective. That's the important thing. They're still effective. They still do their job. And we're going to get into the tier list, because I think I've wasted enough of everyone's time going over this little build-up here. So, jumping right into with the skeletons, they are a bit squishier, again, than most other tier 1s by a pretty pretty substantial margin depending on exactly who you're which unit you're looking at. They do actually pretty reasonable damage. 1 to 3 damage range on a 4 attack is not shabby for a tier 1. That's pretty good, actually. Just unfortunate, yeah, well, I shouldn't say unfortunate, but the trade-off is that they have 6 HP and 1 defense, so they kind of fold a stiff breeze. Nothing too terribly impressive about the skeleton. No passive or active abilities. You get 30 of them a week at 40 a pop. They're not a bad creature overall. Perfectly reasonable tier 1 creature. And as much as I'd love to put them in C tier, where totally reasonable tier 1 creatures should be, they're actually I can't do it. They're unfortunately kind of in D tier, which doesn't make sense. Why would a perfectly reasonable unit be in D tier and not C tier, the perfectly reasonable tier? And the biggest reason is as we've talked about in other tier lists, it all comes down to arcane dust. Arcane dust is just such a valuable resource. And here's the kicker, I shouldn't say here's the kicker, but it's such a valuable resource, so knowing how to spend your early arcane dust to get the biggest bang for your buck is what honestly separates units like, say, the swordsman in Temple from the troglodyte in Dungeon. The troglodyte and both of its upgrades are garbage. It's just a really terrible unit, so I don't like spending my early arcane dust on that unit, whereas the swordsman is a pretty decent unit, and both of its upgrades are actually pretty good. I have my preferences, but they're both pretty good upgrades. And I don't necessarily have a lot of qualms about using some of my early arcane dust to do that upgrade. The thing is, you don't need arcane dust to upgrade the skeleton dwelling. They are arcane dust free, which means, and I should also note, it's only 1,000 gold to upgrade the dwelling on top of all that. So it's just dirt cheap to upgrade your skeleton dwelling. There's no, how should I say, like secondary economy costs, since you're not spending the arcane dust. I don't know if I'm phrasing that very well. I could probably phrase it better if I took a second, but we're just going to move on. But there's not that additional arcane dust, so it means that the skeleton is just kind of overshadowed by the fact that it's so easy and so efficient to get its upgrades that the skeleton by itself just isn't impressive, and no one, there's very little reason to have it beyond day like 2 or 3. So, yeah, perfectly good unit, let down, strangely enough, by the fact that you have access to its upgrades whenever you want, preferably earlier, but you get the idea. Speaking of the skeleton's 2 upgrades, we have the skeleton warrior, which, that doubles? Hold on. Okay, no, it's not quite doubles. It gets +2 to its attack. I thought it doubled from 3 to 6. My bad. But it gets 2 extra attack. It gets 2 extra defense. Its damage range increases from 1 to 3 to 2 to 3, so a little bit tighter damage range, a little bit more consistent damage, always valuable. Boost to its initiative by 2. It's just a better version of the skeleton. There's really nothing more about it. It's just the skeleton, but it's better. C tier. Not much to talk about there, unfortunately. However, the other upgrade you get for the skeleton is the skeleton archer, which only adds a single point of defense, is the only change, aside from the fact that it goes from being a melee unit to a range unit. And having a range unit really early in the game, potentially, depending on circumstances, on day 1, it's pretty good. Yeah, it's not a super powerful unit. It needs an absolute metric shit ton of units in the stack to put out any sort of like big numbers, but they're still valuable. They're an early game range unit. You do get a lot of them in each. How should I say this? Each cycle. There we go. Each week cycle, you get a lot of them. So they do stack up quite nicely. The fact that they're range means that they're relatively safe. So even for a level 1, you can stack up a pretty sizable chunk of them within the first couple of weeks or so, especially if there's a few dwellings hanging out on the map. So, yeah, I just think they're the better option. Yeah, they don't hit quite as hard, but again, they're not having to expose themselves to the damage and to death. The enemy has to somehow get to them, and there's a lot of cheeky things you can do against the neutral enemies, especially if they are enemies with low speed. Granted, the skeleton has low speed, but again, I think the range just vastly outshines anything that the skeleton warrior can do, which is why I'm putting it in B tier like that. Okay, next up we have, I keep calling them ghosts, but apparently we're using white wraith again, along with phantasm. But fine. The whites and the wraiths are back. The ghostly creatures. Interestingly enough, wait, no, I can't say that. That's right. The one does get defense, but generally speaking, these are kind of defined by being the tier 2 units with 0 defense. So anyway, besides the whole 0 defense thing, they also only have 2 attacks, so they actually don't hit nearly as hard as skeletons. Although they do have a 2 to 4 damage range, so they do more damage. They're kind of just skeletons, but with flight. Really kind of just it. They're a little bulkier. I mean, 9 HP. Well, I wouldn't even say they're that much bulkier. 9 HP on 0 defense versus 6 HP on 1 is, I wouldn't say comparable because of the way the stats work, but it's not necessarily as far off as it sounds. So yeah, they're basically just another skeleton with a higher initiative, and they can fly, that's definitely nice. Flying skeletons and all that. I guess they do have passive traits. Sorry, I completely forgot about the passive trait. So they have Memory Devour, which converts 20% of the damage that the white deals into additional HP that can create temporary units until the battle's over. So, okay, I lied. They're not quite skeletons. They're definitely better than skeletons in terms of raw abilities. They are just really squishy, though. Whether tier 2 or otherwise, they're just very squishy. I think I would generally prefer a smaller stack of skeleton warriors to whites. I think I would. I think I'd leave it like that. I don't necessarily hate whites, but they're just a little bit better version of the skeleton. But the Wraith gets more attack, still 0 defense, still 9 HP. The extra point of speed is always nice. It's going from 3 to 4. Bonus initiative up to 7. 7's not bad. I can take 7 initiative. Their Memory Devour 2 now converts 40% of the damage they deal instead of 20% into additional HP for those temporary units. They also have Banshee Howl, which is an active ability that costs 1 focus point. It forces the target enemy creature to move to a random adjacent hex, if possible. Does not end the turn of the Wraith. I mean, these are actually pretty good, I'll be honest. The extra little bit of attack, the extra movement, the 40% conversion to HP, they're definitely better. Real question is, do I care? I don't know how good they are. Like, imagining, like, say you're Temple and you walk up to a maybe not Temple, because Temple units, they're generally pretty kind of meh. They might pick up a Wraith just because it's better than what they might have access to. But like Schism or Dungeon, for example, both of them have much better units than the Wraith. I don't see them giving two shits if they find a Wraith. They might take it. I don't know. You're taking a morale penalty for a decent enough unit, I guess. It's okay. You can definitely use it as a meat shield. It's not a bad meat shield. It does cost Arcane Dust to upgrade. I'll put it above the Ghost, but I'll leave it in the same tier. It is a better Ghost. I just don't know if I'd spend the Arcane Dust, at least early in the game. I think there's just better upgrades available for you than what the Ghost, the Wraith provides. But it's pretty decent in comparison, so I'll give it that. Okay, so next up we got the Phantasm, the Ghost with some defense at 3. It gets the same speed and initiative boost that the Wraith does. It retains Memory Devour 1, so it only converts 20% of the damage into temp HP. But it does have another passive called Nightmares, which, after attacking the target, curses the target to take 1 point of pure damage at the start of its turn. It's 1 point, or I should say 1 point of pure damage per Phantasm in the stack. Sorry. One point of pure damage per Phantasm in the stack, that the effect stacks, and it lasts for 2 rounds. So you'll take, well, basically damage equal to whatever the Ghost stack is twice in a row. It's going to vary. I don't know how else to... I can give you some examples, but everything's so irrelevant. Like, oh, it's 30 Ghosts, so you take an additional 60 damage. But if it's 200 Ghosts, you take, 600 extra damage. Or no, 400. Sorry, you don't take it on the turn, you do it. So yeah, it'd be 400 and... What did I say, 30 before? 60, yeah. You take 60 or 400, but... Or anywhere in between, or less, or more, because again, it's how numbers work. You know how numbers work. I don't know why I'm trying to go off on that one. Anyway, the point is, where would I put... Actually, one more thing before I rate the Phantasm, because this is an important thing that's going to come up several times as we go down the line here of undead units. You may start to notice, for those of you who haven't played the game, you may start to notice a pattern, is that a lot of the undead will have one upgrade that does its own thing, and another upgrade that causes some form of damage over time effect, like this Nightmares. We're going to talk more about that later when it becomes relevant, but I want to point out that you're going to notice that a lot, and I feel like that's something that, while I'm going to talk about it, it's one of those things that kind of tilts which sort of upgrades you want based on what we're going to talk about later. So, just like any tier list where this is going to be opinionated as fuck, because that's just what tier lists are, I'm going to go ahead and just put on the record right now that I have tried the build where you do the DOTs from all your units among hero spells and abilities, and I think it's a fun build. I enjoy it. I don't think it's the better build for Necropolis as a whole. So understand that when I say that, despite saying that, I actually think the Phantasm is probably just a little bit better than the Wraith. I like the extra defense. Actually, yeah, you don't get the full conversion, but I like the extra damage from Nightmares all the same. I don't think either of them is like super, super good in comparison. Like these two units are probably, yeah, I'll say it. They're probably the closest in terms of, I don't know I'm just going to say balance. They're probably the most evenly balanced upgraded units of all the units, or at least most of the units in the game, where it becomes really difficult to choose which one you want. I shouldn't say no, hold on, let me rephrase that. Not that it's difficult to choose which one you want, but you can't really like go wrong with one over the other. There's not like this definitive better upgrade. I mean, there probably is. That's how numbers work. But the definitive upgrade between these two is not as cut and dry as a lot of other, I guess is how I should phrase that. Anyway, moving on to the undead pets, or dogs, or whatever you want to call them. Bone dogs. All right, so now we get to see some, well, a little bit more oomph, shall we say, from the necromancers. Sort of. I mean, not really, but sort of. I'm just, before I make an ass of myself, I wanted to compare. So statistically, they're not like super competitive with the other tier 3s. The other tier 3 units really kind of blow them out of the water. I know I was saying the Necropolis units tend to be just a little bit weaker than average. The undead pets take that to a whole new level. They're much weaker than a lot of the other ones. They do have 5 speed, so I don't want to knock them completely because I do love me my speed. They also have, I should note, the melee defense 1, which causes them to take 30% less damage from all melee sources. So there's 6 defense on 14 HP. It goes a lot further than you might think if you're fighting a lot of melee units. Although these guys still kind of just blow up to range units and spells due to their low HP. But they got 5 speed, and they got 5 initiative. They're again not bad. And if it wasn't for 2 things, one, they're actually quite available in terms of how should I say this? In terms of getting their dwelling online, it only takes the boneyard, I think it's called, right? Is it the boneyard or the graveyard in this one? Skeletons. But regardless of whatever the skeleton dwelling is called, you only need the skeleton dwelling, which you default have in most maps, even most castles that you'll get on most maps. So it's really easy to just right away pick up some undead pets and just start using them. They're not super great. Still kind of debating where I want them. C tier's looking really fat, right? Do you think they're better than the Ghost? I'd probably put them above the Skeleton Warrior. Is the Skeleton Archer really that much better than everything else so far? Do I like that? I'm going to leave him in C tier for now, but reserve the right to change my opinion. I hate the C tier's just getting so big already. Okay, moving on. The Bargeist. Bargeist? Bargeist, I think it's Bargeist. Where are we going? Bargeist. So this is, I should note, so basically, between the 2 upgrades of the Undead Pet, you basically get an offense version, the Bargeist, and the defensive version, the Armored Hound. So one of them gets 8 attack, the other gets 8 defense. Other than that, that's not quite the only difference, because the Bargeist also has 6 speed and 8 initiative, which is pretty good. Still has melee defense 1, which is fun. It also has Bone Crusher, which is another passive that reduces the target's defense by 1 with each strike, and gains an equal amount until the end of battle. I mean, it's not terrible. It is the offensive one, so taking away the enemy's defense is nice because it means you do more damage with not only the dog but with any other attacks you're making. Boosting the dog's defense, I guess 14 HP and 6 defense is nothing too terribly impressive. So you're not going to like super buff the dog with, even like if you get to attack 3 or 4 times, it's not going to make much of an impact on the dog's survivability. But it's a nice effect nonetheless. I do like it. It's a nice support utility ability for the team, especially for some of your other big hitters. Its active ability, you got a two focus point ability called Call the Pack, which this creature summons 20% of its current amount as temporary units, which is pretty cool. So it's just a way to do more damage, basically. I mean, it also is defensive, since 20 temporary units means that they have to go through those 20 temp units first. Not that it's going to be hard, but it's a nice ability. I don't know if I like that it costs 2 focus points. The undead tend to be a very, very, very focus point heavy. And knowing how to spend your focus points when and building them up quickly and manipulate around, like the undead are very, very focus point. How do I want to say this? Like they like their focus point economy, I guess is the best way I can think to say that. And this particular ability is decent, but not great. And when you're as dependent on focus points as the undead are, I feel like this ability gets kind of shunted down the priority list, shall we say, in favor of a lot of other potential focus point ability or focus abilities. So I don't hate it. I think it's pretty decent. Early in the game, you'll probably get some pretty good use out of it. But as you get into kind of the mid game and you're getting into some of the bigger, more important fights, and you've got all your tier 6 and 7 and 5 and so on units, I just feel like this one kind of gets, again, shunted down the priority list because the other abilities that use 2 or more focus points type of thing are just more impactful, more powerful, and so you don't want to be spending them on. Maybe if they reduced it to 1, I could see it being a little bit more impactful. But again, I don't hate it. And I honestly think these guys are pretty. I would probably be willing to spend my I say probably. I actually do spend my early Arcane Dust upgrading the dogs. I don't think they're a fantastic upgrade, but I do think that the dog itself is such a kind of meh, a mediocre unit. And I think the upgrades, both of them, we're going to talk about the other one, obviously, but I think both the upgrades are pretty decent for it. And I think I don't hate spending that Arcane Dust to get these guys early. I think it gives your army a little bit more oomph right when you need it too. Anyway, Armor Hound, 18 health, 8 defense, so a little bit more health, a little bit more defense. Still has melee defense 1, so with that extra 4 HP and the extra 2 defense combined with melee defense, these guys can definitely just tank in melee rather efficiently. They are, again, still very susceptible to spells and to range attacks because their health is just so low. But melee units, they can definitely stay in melee for some time quite efficiently. They also have 2 other passive traits: Protect the Fallen, which is whenever a friendly creature dies, this creature gains +3 defense until the end of battle. It's not a bad ability. Extra defense is nice. Helps health go even further against both range and melee, not so much spells. It's conditional based on your units dying, so it's kind of a way to help keep you into the fight, but I'll be honest, if you're losing a fight to the point where you're triggering Protect the Fallen, there's a pretty good chance you don't necessarily have a lot of Armored Hound left to benefit from it. So it's a nice ability, but I may be wrong, but I don't feel like this is as impactful as I think the developers thought it would be. I think the Armored Hound is just a little too much of a frontline meat shield, where it's going to be dwindling in numbers by the time this takes effect, and so it's not going to be a huge impact. But it's a nice ability. It's not a bad ability. I mean, it can't be a bad ability because it's not negatively impacting the Armored Hound. The other one, Lacerate Wounds. It wounds the target, causing the target to take 2 damage per unit in this stack at the start of its turn. And its is the start of the unit that was bitten, not this creature's turn. The effect is stackable, lasts for 2 rounds, does not affect undead embodiments of constructs. See, this is interesting. The Lacerate Wounds, I really wish the Lacerate Wounds was on the Bargeist, because Lacerate Wounds just feels really offensive-oriented. Whereas on the Armored Hound, it's basically turning its kind of sort of abysmal damage into acceptable. And again, Protect the Fallen's not like super impactful. That said, I do think there's a lot of reason to have the Armored Hounds. As we said before, saying already, the Skeleton Archers are something you can get on day 1 or maybe day 2 if you're depending on circumstances. And you can, in that regard, use the Armored Hounds very effectively alongside them, because the Armored Hounds can, say, split them into 2 stacks and let them just kind of bully the enemy and take hit after hit rather successfully while your skeletons get to pick shit off. I do think the Bargeist is my preferred, but this is another one, I think I was saying Temple thing, where this is one of the units I actually have found myself switching back and forth, using the Armored Hound early in the game, and then switching to the Bargeist once I have a little bit more of a standing army, and I don't need them to act as walls to protect the skeletons and the likes. So I think I'm going to leave it like that. Like I said, I think the Undead Pet is definitely a feasible investment of Arcane Dust. I think this works out really nicely early in the game. I think there's a lot of value in the offer. Do I give it this just because of what you can do? I think I'm going to swap them, actually. I think I do like the Bargeist more, but I think I'm going to swap it just because winning the early game is so important, and I think these guys, combined with your Skeleton Archers, are such a solid way to kind of control melee-based neutral enemies. So I'm going to do that. I think these guys help you win the early game, and I think that's more important than the contribution these guys are going to make later. I'm going to do that, even though I think these are probably the best. Okay, Grave Robber. I'll be honest, the first couple of times I was using these guys, I was not terribly impressed. Then I started using them a bit more, and kind of shifted my opinion a little bit. I'm not going to go so far as to say that they're a fantastic unit, but I think they have a lot to offer, and they shouldn't be counted out. I was doing to my own detriment. They're kind of squishy, again, similar to the, kind of everything, because, again, the undead tend to have kind of slightly less cost-efficient units to make up for the fact that the necromancy is a thing. But 13 attack is not a small number for a tier 4. I don't want to say it's the highest, not without looking. Okay, it is actually the highest attack stat in faction dwelling creatures. I don't. Okay, yeah. So of the neutrals, the Star Child has more attack. So it's got the second highest attack of all tier 4 creatures, which is pretty respectable. 7 to 9 damage is a pretty acceptable range. Nothing like super fantastic, but it's definitely pretty decent, I suppose, for a creature that's got reach. So you don't have to worry about taking the retaliation attack. They are slow at 3 speed, which that is one thing I'm not a super big fan of, especially with the 2 initiative. These guys are probably going to be the last ones to act in any round, and it's going to take them 2 to 3 rounds just to make their first attack. But I don't hate them. Like I said, I've kind of grown to appreciate them, especially since they have the Dig Up Bones ability, which summons 2 skeletons per grave robber in an adjacent hex. This is one of those abilities I was saying. Oh, I should note it costs 2 focus points. Sorry. This is what I was saying before about how the undead just have abilities that are probably going to be better than the Bargeist one. And while summoning 2 skeletons isn't super relevant for the 2 focus points, as we talk about the upgrades to the grave robber, you'll understand why, if you don't already know why. Yeah, like I said, I kind of didn't like them. I've grown to really appreciate these guys. They're a little slow, which I think is the only thing that's keeping them out of A tier. That and the fact that their dwelling does cost 5, if I'm not mistaken, Mercury. Which, not an impossible ask, but you're not necessarily going to have 5 Mercury just floating around. Probably within the first week you can get 5 Mercury pretty efficiently. More often than not, I'll say you can probably get 5 Mercury in the first week. Maybe they... No, I'm still keeping them in B. I'm putting them at high B, though. Put them up here. I think they're just a little bit too slow. I think if they had like 4 speed, I could maybe squeeze them up into A tier. I think that 3 speed is holding them back, so I'll get them in B tier. But I do think they're pretty good. All right, Merchant of Death. Not a lot changes except for 2 very important things. 1, it gets 1 extra speed, and 2, it gets 3 extra initiative. 5 initiative isn't going to be, charging out into battle first thing, but you're probably not going to be last. You're probably going to be contesting for last with something else, a few other things on the battlefield. They do change some of their abilities. So first they get a new passive called Blighted Corpses, which is when they make their long reach attack, it poisons the enemy. Poisoned enemies take 3 magic damage per Merchant of Death per turn. It's stackable and lasts for 2 rounds. It does not affect undead, dragons, embodiments, or constructs. They switch out their Dig Up Bones. I shouldn't say switch up Dig Up Bones. They still have Dig Up Bones. They can still get the 2 skeletons, but they can instead summon 1 white per Merchant of Death for the same cost, the same 2. Which, I'll be honest, you're probably using Dig Up Bones, because like I said, skeletons are kind of just whites, but they don't fly, and you're getting 2 to 1. So if you're using Merchant of Death, you're probably going to use Dig Up Bones a little bit more frequently than the Ensnare Memories, which you'd probably use only if you're in a siege and you need some extra help to get over the wall. I think the Merchant of Death is a perfectly feasible upgrade. And it, like we were talking about before, it kind of, you can see it's got the DOT effect. Unfortunately, upgrading them is a bit of a tall order, in my opinion. They don't, how should I say this? How do I phrase this to make it clear what my trying to get across? It's not that I don't know, how am I going to do this here? It's if I can find the word here real quick. It's going to work. No, that's not. Okay. Okay, I'm not going to be able to find the word, fortunately. But the point is, I don't. This is one of those things where the arcane dust cost is kind of coming into play to an extent. I think spending the arcane dust on your grave robbers is actually pretty feasible. Actually, so I guess it's actually, I need to rephrase that, because it's not the arcane dust that's stopping me from upgrading them. It's the mercury cost. The undead are extremely mercury dependent. The entire line, the grave robber from the whites into grave robbers into likes into vampires, it's really mercury intensive. And so even if you aren't trying to rush vampires, upgrading your grave robbers right away could mean having to delay your likes, which I don't really like the idea of delaying my like. And the truth is that once you have likes, spoiler alert, you're probably going to want to upgrade them before you upgrade grave robbers. So I'm going to put the Merchant of Death just behind the grave robber, because I think it's a really good upgrade, but I think it's one of those upgrades that I delay in favor of other upgrades, or even just other units for dwellings, just like, again, the like specifically in this case. But I think it's a pretty decent. The Kennel Master, on the other hand, retains the 4 speed of the other upgrade, loses 1 initiative, but increases damage from 7 to 9 to 8 to 10, so +1 on both minimum damage. It's a new passive trait called Smell of the Hunt, which generates 1 focus point when a friendly creature dies. Now, this one I want to point out just real quick. Unlike the Bargeist, which gets the 3 defense after a unit dies, and then again your Bargeist stack is probably pretty close to death at that point. Is it the Bargeist? No, it was the Armored Hound. Sorry, the Armored Hound has that effect, or that ability. But either way, your dogs are basically dead or close to it, because the battle's probably not really going in your favor if you're losing a unit. Or it's not that you're not. It's not that it's not going in your favor, but it's probably not a battle where you're winning. So getting 3 extra defense on the Hound didn't make much of a difference. If you're in a fight where you are kind of more or less evenly matched, and you lose a creature, and the benefit is you get a focus charge out of it, that's pretty good. Again, like I said, the undead tend to be extremely focus charge dependent. So this is a really awesome ability. I really like this. It doesn't trigger all that often, but when it does, it oftentimes can turn what would be pretty close to a stalemate or even a potential loss into a win, just because it gave you the focus charge you need. I think there's a lot of value in it. You can even, early in the game, if you get these guys, like maybe you find them in a merc camp, or maybe you do decide to upgrade the dwelling early in the game, which is a perfectly acceptable thing. Again, you can do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just don't necessarily do it myself. But you can purposely make a bunch of 1 stacks and drop them on purpose just to generate focus points. Just have them walk up, hit something to burn a retaliation, and get a focus charge out of it. Kennel Master, like, I haven't even finished talking about the Kennel Master's other abilities, and you can already feel where this guy's going to end up. let's quick go through the rest of his abilities. So he has Dig Up Bones, so he can still get 2 skeletons per Kennel Master. But he also has Fetch, which can summon 1 undead pet for every 2 Kennel Masters. Which, it's alright. It still costs 2 focus points. It has Hail, which marks an enemy, causing them to always take max damage from all sources. Another 2 cost ability. No range, or I should say it's ranges, so it doesn't have to be adjacent or nearby. It just needs to have 2 focus points. Yeah, Kennel Master just pretty good. Hail is nice. This is another one where there might be some other abilities that have higher priority in terms of use of their focus point, but this is definitely not as low as the Bargeist ability is, where the Bargeist has a very low priority ability. I think Hail is a little bit more impactful, and I would generally use that one first myself. Summoning some extra undead pets. It's kind of cool, but all 3 of his abilities cost 2 focus points. I think Hail's his best one. I think there's some reason to use the Dig Up Bones or the Fetch, but I think those ones are niche scenarios where you use them when the scenario hits, whereas Hail is just allows the Kennel Master to contribute a lot more over the course of a game. But again, I think Smell of the Hunt is the selling point. I love that ability. It is really, really good. Once again, I'm torn because of the fact that upgrading these guys delays other units, but I think the Kennel Master is just, you know what, I don't know if I like it, but I think for now anyway, I'm gonna put the Kennel Master in A tier. As I said, the undead are very focus point heavy, and the Kennel Master really lets you abuse focus point. I shouldn't say lets you abuse, but you can abuse the Kennel Master to abuse focus point. I think I'm gonna do that. I know it seems weird that the other upgrade is somehow below it, because if you upgrade the Grave Robber at all, you have access to both of them. But I think the Kennel Master is just crucial to undead play. I think it's just really, really important to the undead as a whole. So I'm going to do that for now. I think I like that. All right, the likes. Everyone's favorite. Staple of the undead since Heroes of Might and Magic 2, when the undead were first introduced, and they killed half your army when you didn't know that their attack exploded. Oh boy. Then they fixed it in 3. Actually, there wasn't likes in 4. That's right, they had that weird venom spawn. What happened to the like? That's unfortunate that they did. Anyway, I'm going off on memory tangents. Let's get back into what actually matters here. In this case, how good is the likes in Olden Era? And I'll be honest, again, statistically, they're kind of meh like a lot of the undead units are in terms of raw stats. And it's what else they can provide besides their stats that matter. And in this case, the likes come with Rewind Death and restore 20 HP per Lich to a friendly unit. It can revive fallen units. Costs 2 charges. Pretty standard, again, undead. For the Necropolis really need to get their focus points in line. You're going to be playing them. It's very crucial to them to have their focus points. But yeah, Rewind Death, pretty good. Just get a free extra spell to keep your guys alive. And when you're not using Rewind Death, you're doing kind of sort of decent damage. 12 attack and 11 to 16 damage is a little on the weaker side. as just a direct comparison here, I'll show you the Medusa has 10 more HP, 4 more attack, and a slightly wider damage range. The Medusa is 10 to 18 to the likes 11. Other than that, I think their defense is Medusa's got 1 extra defense. But their initiative, their speed. So, and that's just the Medusa. Once you start looking at some of the other units, none of them like compare favorably. I guess, okay, the cavalry compares. The cavalry statistically is maybe a teensy bit better than the like, but it doesn't have the utility the like has, nor is it range. So it's really unfortunate because again, the cavalry kind of sucks. Go watch my other video if you want to understand just how bad the cavalry is. Like here's another range unit just for a good comparison. So the concubine has 60 HP, so 10 more. It has 5 more attack. It has 3 more defense. A damage range of 14 to 19. Yeah, the other units just again, it's just the way the undead are. So it's hard to be like, oh, statistically they suck because. Again, that's kind of the whole nature of the undead. It's still a decent unit overall. It's definitely on the expensive side when it comes to getting its dwelling, and it's really only the undead who give 2 shits about the likes. If it wasn't for the fact that they're so expensive in terms of the B tier. I don't want to put them in B tier because they're just a very good utility unit. And it seems weird to not put them at the very tier when I was saying I would rather have like upgrade robber. But the thing is that if you can upgrade the grave robber, then you can build the likes. So do I put them right here? I think I do. I think I slot them in there. Yeah, I think that's fair because they cost a lot. You have to not only build these guys, but then spend I think it's an extra 10. Yeah, it's 10, I believe, mercury on top of it. They're very expensive. They're actually more expensive. Like buying and upgrading the grave robber is cheaper in total mercury than. I'm gonna do this. No, I'll do that. I think likes are a good unit, but I don't. It's not like they're so good that I'd break my economy to make sure that I get them in the first week. I would like to have, though. I think I would do that. I wouldn't break my economy to get them in the first week, but I would do a lot to make sure I get them in the first week. So I'll put it up like that. I think that's okay. Next up, Pestilent Lich, and this is where we get to have that big ass conversation I was having. But to start, their attack goes up from 12 to 17. Nice improvement. Damage goes up to a flat 16. Not bad. Speed and initiative both go up by 1. Nothing to shake a fist at, but they're still not exactly fast. They don't need to be. They're range, so speed is kind of. I don't hold that against range units as much as I do other units. Initiative 5 again is kind of meh. You're competing for going last rather than being. Anyway, passive trait, they get the area strike that everyone's so familiar with, where it deals damage to the target and all hexes around it. And if I recall correctly, unless hopefully they haven't fixed this, making myself look like an ass. But last time I played, which was the area of effect hit undead allies. So it's back to like Heroes 2 likes. You're blowing up your own unit. You're not careful. They do have the active ability, Death's Embrace, which Triggers all effect. I should know this costs one. This is one focus point. Sorry, this costs one focus point. Is Death's Embrace, and it triggers all effects applied to the target instantly using their full remaining duration. These effects are then removed. Now it specifies effects because there are other things besides damage over time that can be triggered this way, but primarily it's trying to get you to throw a bunch of DOTs on stuff and then pop it for big damage. This is like what I was saying where I wanted to have that big conversation. You notice, like I said, a lot of the undead units have come with DOT effects. And again, your hero can cast spells that have DOT effects. And this is why. This is why, because you can stack all those DOT effects on something, and then have the pestilent lich. I keep switching between lich and like. I'm gonna screw everybody up and be like, he's going to pronounce it correctly, or is he going to continue to pronounce it incorrectly? Both. All right, I'm trying to be fair. Technically speaking, the word that is spelled Lich is supposed to be pronounced like. That was how it was pronounced in its original language when the word was created. English and other languages besides English, but specifically English in this case, pronounce it lich because that's the way Lich is pronounced English. But again, in its native language, it's supposed to be pronounced like. Not the point, but at least now you know why I keep going back and forth between the two. Point is, blowing people up with Death's Embrace. It's a lot of fun. Like I said, I've done builds around this where I try and get as much DOT on different enemies as I can and then start popping them with Death's Embrace. There is one problem with it, is you tend to either focus down one unit, putting as much DOT onto them as possible so that the light can pop all the DOT all at once, and that unit just ceases to exist, which is fun. But when you're in a big battle and there's 7 units you're trying to fight, putting everything you have against one enemy unit just so you can pop them, it's not necessarily the absolute optimal strategy in every instance you're trying to fight the enemy. It's fun, but even if you are trying to focus all of your DOT onto one enemy, I've noticed that you don't necessarily always get to focus all your DOT onto one enemy. Oftentimes your units are going to get split up and start getting hampered by other units. Enemy spells are a thing. There's just a lot that's kind of you have to overcome. That's how I'll say. There's a lot you have to overcome to really get this Death's Embrace to be effective. I think Death's Embrace might be a little bit more powerful or a little bit more usable. Make the whole DOT stacking, not even DOT stacking, but make the whole idea behind Death's Embrace and stacking, or not stacking, I keep saying stacking, but making the whole applying DOTs and then triggering Death. I think it would be better if Death's Embrace just was, let's say 3 for the sake of argument. 3 focus charges, but it caused all DOT on all enemies to trigger. I think that would just be a better overall ability then. Because as it is, 1 focus point for Death's Embrace is pretty reasonable, but you're giving up the Like's ability to cast Rewind Death. I don't know if I noted that before, but they don't have Rewind Death in this form. You give up that ability for Death's Embrace. You have an AoE that can hit your own target or your own units, again, unless they updated it. I completely missed that in the update, but as of that time frame, it was still at the... it was still in a phase where it would hit your own units. So just don't like the Pestilent Lich in the state it's in right now, as of the recording of this video. I just don't like it. I think it's fun. All right, let me make that perfectly clear. I'm going to put them right below the other way. Above the ghosts. Actually, no, I'd put them above. Yeah, we'll do that. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in this build, and I encourage everyone to try it for themselves and definitely do it. I just don't think that the build is there, because I don't think Death's Embrace is as powerful as Death's Embrace needs to be to make the build truly shine. So that's my argument. That's kind of the little spiel I was going on about all the DOTs. Let's talk about the other Lich. The Sanguine Lich. Now I'm going back to Lich. So passive. It has Unlife, Undeath. It restores 20% of the damage dealt as HP to all friendly units, but does not revive them. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty decent. Helps all your units go just a little bit longer. Not the stack as a whole. I mean, technically the stack as a whole, but because it doesn't revive units, it's just kind of keeping units topped off. It does help a little bit, especially some of your higher level units that we're going to get to, especially with the Dread Knights and the Vampires and yada yada yada. I think this is a pretty decent ability. It's nice. Knowledge of Death increases the amount of XP gained by 10%. It doesn't say it here, but I don't know why it doesn't say it, but it increases the amount of XP gained by the hero in control of the Lich by 10%. I mean, sure, why not? It's 10% extra XP. Why not? It's not a fantastic ability, but it's not bad either. It's perfectly good. Why not have it in your party? Its Rewind Death is increased from 20 HP per like to 30 HP per like. And it revives Fallen as it does before. Still costs 2. Doesn't get the AoE that the other one does. I should note, I completely forgot, this is actually a pretty important one. Its defense goes from 12 to 17. So that's pretty decent. That's a pretty nice jump. A lot bulkier. And yeah, this is unfortunately, I think I'm just going to put it just below the base like. And I do that because the like is kind of just a utility unit in this game, at least, again, from my perspective. It's a utility unit more than it's an offensive unit or defensive unit or anything else. It's a utility unit first, everything else second. And while the 10 extra HP per like is a huge improvement, once again, upgrading and buying the... I forgot the name of it now. Mausoleum. Is it still Mausoleum? Crap, I'm going to keep calling it Mausoleum. But buying and upgrading the Mausoleum is just really, really expensive. And so it's one of those things where I'd rather just get the like, get the effects of Rewind Death and the benefits it provides, and then come back for the Sanguine like when resources and, well, mostly resources, time, but mostly when resources permit. So I'm going to leave it like that. I think that's pretty fair. Okay, Dread Knights. Remember when I was saying that there's just a lot of, like, what do you call them? Necropolis units that just, they're not terribly, they just in general tend to be a little bit weaker than a lot of the other comparative units. Well, here's kind of the exception to the rule, kind of. It's not, again, the strongest of any of the tier 6s, but it's more comparable to a lot of the other tier 6s, or I should say it compares slightly more favorably. Let's it compares just a little bit more favorably to its fellow tier 6s than the other Necropolis units have compared to their respective tiers. It's still a little bit worse, arguably. Well, not even arguably. It is just instinct or just statistically worse than a lot of the other tier 6s. But again, I think the barrier between, or the distance between this unit, the Dread Knight, and the others is shorter, smaller than the other. Especially because it's 19 attack and 12 to 14 damage. Comes with double strike, which, that's nice. That's very nice. It also has Dreadful Presence, which reduces all enemy morale by 1. This effect does not stack, only the strongest one is active. Pretty nice. Kind of like the old Bone Dragon aura from previous Heroes games. The Dread Knight is pretty good. I think it's a pretty decent unit, pretty valuable to the undead as a whole. And here is perhaps the kicker and why I'm about to do what I'm about to do. It has pretty minimal prerequisites. It needs the kennels for your dogs, which are no rare resources, just wood, ore, and money. And it needs the level 1 wall, which is 5,000 gold and 5 ore, if I'm not mistaken. And then it needs its own building, which again requires no rare resources, just wood, ore, and money for your tier 6 unit. Depending on how quickly and what actual resources are just kind of lying around on your map, it is not anywhere close to infeasible. Unfeasible? Unfeasible. There we go. Not anywhere close to unfeasible to have these guys on day 3. I've done it multiple times. It's not guaranteed, but it's pretty reliable. And I would say, if nothing else, even if you don't get them on day 3, it's very reliable to pick them up in the first week of the game. And having a tier 6 unit in the first week, let alone the first few days of the game, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. They can go ahead and compare a little unfavorably to their fellow tier 6s because they get to laugh at their other fellow tier 6s when they're running around active in the first week of the game. The other tier 6 units are all crying because they're stuck behind these huge, elaborate paywalls in order to get them. So yeah, I'm giving the Dread Knight an S tier because it's actually quite achievable in terms of availability to get early in the game. It's got some pretty nice stats overall. And double strike, it's pretty good. It's just a pretty damn good unit, and it's got all the right things it needs in all the right places. It's my S tier for the undead, for sure. Pretty good unit. Very good unit, I should say. All right, Avatar of War. So, small changes to damage. Damage range goes from 12 to 14 to 18 to 20. Speed from 6 to 7. Initiative from 9 to 11. Pretty decent stat changes overall. Retains double strike. Dreadful Presence increases from 1 to 2, so it reduces morale by 2 to all enemies. And then it has War Incarnate, which reduces the target's attack by 1 with each strike, and gains an amount of equal to that until the end of battle. This effect cannot be dispelled. Okay. So this is really, really cool. I think. I know there was the Bargeist would do this on the defense thing, where it would attack, and it would steal 1 defense from the target per attack. But the Bargeist only attacks once, and its defense is kind of ass, and its HP is bad. So it didn't really get a lot of value out of its ability. The Avatar of War, its attack stat isn't like super, super, super high for a tier 6, but it's still a pretty respectable attack. And because it has double strike, you get to apply this effect twice. Meaning Every time you attack an enemy, you'll reduce their attack stat by 2 and increase your own attack stat by 2 when you attack. I mean, obviously, there's also the retaliation where you'll steal 1 point of attack as well. This is really cool. I really like this ability. I think this is absolutely fantastic. And I've said it before, when it comes to Double Strike, there's some pretty cheeky stuff you can do with Double Strike as a whole. Yeah, generally speaking, you're going to arguably suffer from the fact that the enemy's going to retaliate against you. You can work around that. You know, use a different unit to burn the retaliation, then you get to make 2 attacks at full power. And there's some really, really nifty things you can do in terms of like spell casting to get a lot of value out of Double Strike. I really like the Avatar of War. I think it's a pretty damn good upgrade. And once again, like its predecessor, you don't have to spend rare resources, so it's something that you can potentially get. I don't want to say in the first week, but let's say early, because it does cost, was it 75? 80? I'm trying to remember. I think it's 75, right? Yeah, I think it's 75 arcane dust. So it's a little tough to upgrade in the first week, but still well worth it. I think I'll put it below the Dread Knight only because it's not going to necessarily be the most feasible thing to snag 75 arcane dust in the first couple of weeks, or in the first week anyway, maybe in the second week. But yeah, I think that's fair. Hollow Reaper. So, roids out the attack from 19 to 24. Roids out the damage from 12, I'll check. Yeah, roids out damage from 12 to 14 to 22 to 24. Strangely enough, that's not actually double damage. Although with the attack upgrade, it probably is. I haven't done the math on that one. Point. Initiative goes up to 10. Retains the 6 speed this time. Its Dreadful Presence also boosts to level 2 to reduce morale by 2. It gets Hungering Hollow, which is whenever a friendly unit dies, this unit gains 3 attack until end of battle. It has Death Stare, which causes it to kill 1 enemy in the stack guaranteed whenever it makes an attack. And it works all the way up to tier 7 units, which is pretty good. It doesn't have Double Strike, I should note. Yeah, I don't think I said that. It does not have, it loses Double Strike. But it functionally doubles its attack stat. Or not its attack stat, sorry. It functionally doubles its base damage, which means it deals basically the same amount of damage it would have done with the Double Strike. All at once, which is probably more valuable. Again, you lose some of the little cheeky excuse me. It loses some of the cheeky spellcasting stuff you can pull with Double Strike, but a little bit easier to manage, I guess you could say. The Hungering Hollow is kind of cool, but similar to the Armored Hound. I feel like if you are triggering this effect, it might be too late. Not guaranteed to be too late. I mean, again, you can cheese things out by using 1 stacks. So just let 1 stacks of skeletons or something die so that you can get a bunch of attack on the Hollow Reaper. There are ways to make this really effective. But in the important fights, the most important fights, you're probably not going to have a lot of fodder that's just there to die for the sake of boosting this thing's attack. Nice to have early in the game when you're fighting a bunch of neutrals, because that's where you will be able to throw a bunch of fodder at the wall. But as the game goes on, as you get into the mid-game and you definitely in the end game, you're not necessarily going to have too terribly many extra slots just to have fodder for the sake of giving this guy the juice he needs to really output a lot of damage. I don't hate the Hollow Reaper. I think Death Stare is a pretty decent ability. And I think its stats are definitely there. But I think I generally just prefer the Avatar of War. Just gonna compare real quick. Just double check. Yeah. I think in general, I just take the Avatar of War. Not exclusively. I definitely think the Hollow Reaper has a lot of potential benefits. You can, for example, split your stacks of Hollow Reaper on a secondary hero, and it gives you a lot of power because if enemies come at you with other sizable-ish armies, especially with other tier 6s or tier 7s, and you split these guys up, you can, or even if you just use them on a suicide hero, just put 7 stacks of Hollow Reapers on one hero, charge into the enemy lines, and then just go keep smacking their, say, dragon over and over and over again. And then you lose the fight. You retreat or otherwise just lose, but you killed, say, 6 of their dragons, since dragons have a much higher initiative and will go first. But you killed like 6 of their dragons. So there's definitely cheeky stuff you can do with the Hollow Knight or the Hollow Reaper. I think the Avatar War is better, so I'm going to leave it like that. Okay, the Vampire. This is probably the one everyone's been waiting to talk about, because this is the first time the Vampire has ever been this high on the unit tiers, like a tier 7 Vampire. I'll be honest, when I saw that they made the Vampire tier 7, I was like, really? Well, this is going to be interesting. And then I played with it, and I was like, huh, this isn't as fun as I thought it would be. Now, that's not to say that the tier 7 Vampire isn't a good unit. I just think it was, unfortunately, properly balanced. So I didn't get to just steamroll with vampires like I thought they would. They only have 150 health, which is abysmal in comparison to other tier 7s, most of which, I think all of them, actually, let me double check. Yeah, all of them break 200 HP. So every other tier 7 breaks 200 HP, and these guys have 50 less than the one with the lowest HP. They do have life or vampirism, so they restore 40% of the damage they deal as HP and revives fallen ones. The standard vampires that we all know and love from Heroes Past, I should say. They have a flat 25 damage, so it actually makes doing the math a lot easier for how many vampires am I going to restore? It's a lot easier to figure that out. But 25 attack, 22 defense, it's not terribly impressive. I mean, 25, okay, hold on. Before I make an ass of myself, 25 attack. Okay, 25 attack is definitely on the side of things. Yeah, 25 attack's kind of bad. Okay, so the Vampire is definitely statistically unimpressive. And it's relying 100% on its vampirism to make the unit worth anything. And unfortunately, it doesn't have the enemy doesn't counterattack in its base form. So you'll get to heal, and then if there's any enemy left over, which there probably will be, because your vampires aren't like super, super powerful, they're going to retaliate and take out a bunch of your vampires in return. Yeah, I don't see it. I don't think they're a bad unit, but their dwelling is incredibly expensive at 25 mercury plus everything else. You need the buildup of the whites, so it's the burial grounds. I forget where the grave robbers are built out of, but whatever the dwelling the grave robbers are from, you need the mausoleum. It's a long build-up. It's very mercury intensive, and then their dwelling itself is also mercury intensive. And all you get is a flying unit that restores its own HP when it hits, but it barely has enough health to even make that worth it. I don't see the vampires as being super, super impressive. I think you want them because they are tier 7s, and they're not bad units. They're just, I don't think they do well in comparison to, like, in this tier list environment. I don't think they compare favorably. Like, what they contribute to your army, I don't think is as impactful as what a lot of these other things add. Mm-hmm. I'm debating between somewhere in B or C is my guess. It kind of... I think I'll put them here. I'm looking through this. You know what? I'll do... No, I'll do that. I think the Sanguine Lich provides more for your army than the vampires do. But I think the vampires provide more for your army than everything that's below there. I'll do that. I think that's fair. All right, I like that placement. Next up, Vampire Lord. A 25 HP boost, pretty decent. A nice little defense boost from 22 to 29, so 7 extra points of defense. Damage from 25 to 30. Speed from 5 to 7, and initiative from 11 to 13. In addition, it gains Swift Strike, so enemies don't retaliate against it. An upgrade that is, or an effect that is absolutely critical, because these guys, again, they take a lot of damage on those retaliation attacks. So all that healing doesn't do as much as you think it's going to do when the enemy just gets to hit you back. And now they can't. Honestly, as far as if we were to look at the vampire in a vacuum, this would be S tier in comparison to its predecessor. Because this is just everything, like every stat, every ability, everything the vampire could... The vampire itself lacked, the Vampire Lord has. So, as a direct comparison, it would definitely be S tier. But the 100 Arcane Dust, I think it's 20. I don't think it's a full 25 again. I think it's just 20 to upgrade. But the extra Mercury, whether it's 20 or an additional 25, it's really expensive. If you can get them from like a merc camp, they're pretty damn good. But upgrading the vampire dwelling is really... What did they provide your army? You basically just get a a heavy hitter, but the Dread Knight's a pretty fucking heavy hitter to begin with. And you get him for a lot cheaper. I think I'm gonna do this. I think that's, as strange as it is, I think the Vampire Lord is a necessary upgrade to the Vampire, but I don't think the Vampire Lord contributes anything additional to your army that the Vampire didn't contribute. It's just a better version of the Vampire. I think I'm going to do that. It seems so weird. No. I gotta stick with this, I think. It seems so weird to put a tier 7 right next to the upgraded tier 7 right next to the other tier 7. But as far as what your army is gaining, the two serve basically the same role. It's just the Vampire Lord's a better variant of of serving that role. So I think I'm going to do that. I think the likes provide more to your army. I think the Gravekeepers provide more. And again, as far as heavy hitters, the Dread Knights are pretty decent for heavy hitters, and you can get them earlier. They're a lot more accessible than the Vampire and the Vampire Lord, so I think I'm going to do that, as strange as it looks and kind of feels even. Okay, finally we have the Vampire Scholar. 150 health, so I guess no change there. The attack goes from 25 to 27, so a small boost to attack. Damage also goes up to 30. Initiative up to 12. Retains Vampirism. It does become a reach unit. So it'll attack from 1 extra hex away, so it, in effect, becomes... or prevents the enemy from retaliating, since even other reach units don't retaliate against reach units. I wonder if would I like them to add that to the game? I'm getting distracted, but I think it's a valid one to think about. I don't know. I would like to see the game in a state where reach units retaliate against reach units. I want to see how that would feel. Anyway, Blood Transfusion, activated ability, costs 3 focus points, and it connects an enemy to target friendly unit. The enemy takes 30 magic damage per vampire. The friendly unit restores 50% of the damage dealt as HP. It revives fallen units. It does not affect embodiments or constructs. It does end your turn. There's also Corpse Explosion, blows up chosen corpse. All adjacent enemies take 20 damage, and all adjacent friendly units restore 10% of their HP. It does not revive fallen units. It does not affect embodiments or constructs. Also costs 3 focus points. This is such an interesting one to talk about. So the Corpse Explosion is... I mean, it's not a bad ability. There's definitely instances where there's 2, maybe in rare instances 3 enemies near a corpse. You might have 1, maybe 2 units near a corpse. The total thing is, though, unfortunately, like that, while there might be in some cases 2 or 3 enemies near a corpse, that's only going to be because you are a very high spell damage hero or spell power hero. Cast something like, I don't know, Chain Lightning, for example, or whatever it may be, that you blew up a stack instantly, and then you just cast Corpse Explosion with your Vampire Scholar. The more likely case in many instances is going to be 1 enemy, maybe 1 ally. So you're doing a little bit of damage to 1 unit and healing 10% of your ally's HP without reviving. I think Corpse Explosion has some merit to it, but I don't think it's super good. I kind of feel like it needs to be 2 focus points. I just don't feel like there's a like when you're in a setup where spending 3 focus points for Corpse Explosion feels good, or even like you're underpaying. Those scenarios are so few and far between, at least in my experience. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, but they feel so few and far between. I just don't know if I could commit 3 focus points to it. I think if it was 2, it'd be a little bit something more to talk about, but I just don't think 3 is. The Blood Transfusion, though, that's a little bit better. 30 magic damage per vampire, so you're doing damage as if you attacked the unit. Granted, you're doing magic damage instead of physical, so there's a shift in just exactly how much damage that is. But it's still functionally like making an attack with your vampire stack. And target-friendly unit restores 50% of the damage dealt as HP and revives fallen units. That's worth 3 points. That's pretty good. I like Blood Transfusion. I don't know if I like Vampire Scholars more than I like Vampire Lore. I think there's a lot to be said about the Vampire Scholar in comparison. You know what? No, hold on. I think I know how I want to phrase this. So I was saying before how the Vampire Lord serves a very similar, if not the exact same role as the Vampire does in your army. It's just a better version of the Vampire. The Scholar becomes a little bit more of a utility unit as opposed to just a high damage dealing unit. So I think that's what makes it so hard to kind of compare it directly to the Vampire Lord, is because unlike the Vampire Lord, the Scholar doesn't necessarily fill the same role in your army that the Vampire and the Vampire Lord did. It actually kind of branches out and does something a little bit unique for you. Yeah, I think that just with blood transfusion alone, it just gives the Vampire Scholar a little bit more utility that the other two vampires just don't have, which is what makes it so hard to compare it to the Vampire Lord in terms of which one is better, because they serve different roles at this point. I will say that I kind of wish blood transfusion was a DOT, where instead of doing, well, you can still do the 30 magic damage per vampire, but do 30 magic damage per vampire over the course of 2 turns, just so it could be a part of the Pestilent Lich setup. I think that would make the Vampire Scholar a little bit more appealing. I'm gonna go ahead and throw it there. I think they're both better than the base vampire, but I think I would generally prefer. You know what? You know what? No. You know what? I'm gonna do this. I think I do prefer the Scholar over. I'm thinking back to my games. I think I use the Scholar a little bit. I think I prefer the Scholar. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. I still wish that the blood transfusion would be DOT, so it would stack with the Pestilent Lich and make that strategy a little bit more impressive. But yeah, I think the utility of the Vampire Scholars is. Yeah, yep. Let me just double check the tier list. So yeah, we get those guys. This is an interesting looking tier list. They're basically all in this like C tier, except for the skeleton who fell down to D tier because it doesn't cost arcane dust to get your upgraded skeletons, and then the Kennel Master who boosted himself above the other grave robbers simply for being critical to the undead's preferred battle strategy of focus point spamming. What an interesting tier list. Just a bunch of perfectly average units that all come together to form a very powerful and very fun to play cohesive unit. I like it. I like the Necropolis faction. I think they did a pretty good job in the overall design. I think there could be some small minor tweaks to different stats and different creatures to help improve some of them a little bit, give them a little bit more of a niche, more of a way to differentiate themselves from their constituents. Because again, the ghosts and the skeletons feel identical, except for the skeletons at least have an archer variant. The ghosts are just like, hey, we're slightly less defensive, but we get bonus ghosts and we can fly. But they're basically the same thing. And then again, the Pestilent Lich and finding a better way to utilize that Death Embrace. Was it Death Embrace? I already forgot the name of it. I think it's Death Embrace, right? Oh, Embrace, or yeah, Death's Embrace. Okay. So yeah, if making Death's Embrace a little bit better, even if you have to raise its ability cost to like 2, or even just go all the way up to 3, and like I said, let it hit all the enemies on the field, and then all their DOTs go off at once. I think there's a lot to be said there. I think how should I say this? I think the DOT Pestilent Lich strategy is really fun, and I would really like to see the tweaks needed to make it more viable, because I just feel like the other well, first of all, the other but also just the other sort of unit upgrades that don't do DOT. Well, no, I think I put all my DOT. I think all the DOT ones ended up above the other ones, actually. I think they did. I have to double check that one, actually. But yeah, I think it'd be really fun if there was a bit more of a, I don't want to say push, but incentive. There we go. Just a little bit more incentive to play offensive undead and utilize that Death's Embrace. I just don't feel like that offensive momentum you get from the Pestilent Lich makes up for how powerful the Sanguine Lich is, and the undead's typical play style of just keep reviving them and just don't let your units die, just outlast the opponent. Anyway, that's my tier list. That's my talk about the undead. We'll see you guys next time.